to our first ever virtual memorial chapel at the Ethel Walker School. In this year, a year like no other, we continue to discover opportunities amid the challenges. Today represents just such an opportunity where we can share this very special Walker's tradition with all of you in our school community who might otherwise have been unable to attend the service in person on campus. Memorial Chapel grew out of a tradition of ringing chapel bells during reunion weekends to mark the passing of alumni. We continue to explore our archival records, but so far we know that this is at least the 40th year of this tradition. At that time, in the early 1980s, Walker's was still following many rituals grounded solely in the Christian faith, but beginning to explore more non-denominational or interfaith ways of bringing spirituality to campus. This is the work which we plan to continue, providing understanding and deeper thinking through access to many faith speakers and a recognition of the rituals of many faiths. By 1987, there was a committee of faculty and students who worked to create a school meditation, replacing the Christian prayer regularly used in chapel and the other special occasions. I've been drawn to that meditation since I first came to Walker's and found many occasions where its words are the very best embodiment of all that is deeply important to us. In a few minutes, we will share those words together. As the 21st century began, the school began to expand the ringing of bells in memoriam into a non-denominational memorial chapel service for students, faculty, staff, and guests to recognize alumni as well as other community members lost during the year. It provides a pause, a quiet moment of reflection, not only for all those whom we've lost, but on the depth and breadth of our Walker's community, which endures.
I am Mila Lazarus, a member of Walker's Northfield League. Please join me in reciting the school meditation. May there be peace and unity in the lives we share here together, and strength to take us through our daily challenges. Let us never be afraid to follow where the truth may lead us. May we have insight to understand each other and wisdom to know why we are sometimes misunderstood. Help us to look beyond ourselves and recognize the needs of others. Above all, teach us to love, for in love lies the key to life.
Good morning. I'm Ned Edwards. I'm new to Walker's. I am the director of the Capabilities Approach program, and I teach ethics and social justice. It is a distinct pleasure to be a part of the wonderful tradition of Memorial Chapel at Walker's this year. Strangely enough, it was the Harvard Business Review, a magazine that focuses on business operations, marketing, and finance, that helped us understand our feelings. Now, feelings are not what we usually associate with business magazines, but last March was not usual. As the COVID-19 outbreak was worsening, many of us were anxious, unsettled, on edge, and along came this article entitled, "That Discomfort You're Feeling is Grief." It was an interview with David Kessler, a man who literally wrote the book, or 5 or 6 of them, about grief. We're feeling a number of different griefs, he said. We feel the world has changed, and it has. We know that this is temporary, but it doesn't feel that way. And we realize things will be different. We feel the loss of normalcy, the fear of economic toil, the loss of connection. This is hitting us, and we're grieving collectively. He pointed out that we're also feeling anticipatory grief because we don't know what the future holds. And all of this, he said, feels much like anxiety. That article was tremendously helpful in allowing many of us to name what we were feeling, and thus we could begin to deal with it. We've never dealt with something like a pandemic before, but we have dealt with grief. And it turns out that the feelings of grief and the feelings of fear and anxiety are actually quite similar. It was C.S. Lewis that pointed this out in his book, A Grief Observed. You may remember C.S. Lewis as the author of The Chronicles of Narnia, but Lewis was no stranger to grief. His beloved wife Joy died only 3 years after they were married, and he kept a journal of how he was feeling after her death. At one point he wrote, "No one ever told me that grief felt so much like fear. I'm not afraid, but the sensation is like being afraid. The same fluttering in the stomach, the same restlessness, the yawning. I keep swallowing." It has gotten better for most of us since last March, and being back on campus, being less isolated, being together and having routine all make a huge difference. But there are still times that I get that flutter in my stomach and feel restless, and I now know that feeling is grief. One of the compounding difficulties is that grief begets grief. In other words, whenever we're grieving, we remember vividly any other griefs we may have experienced. So we're not just reacting to one grief. When I feel sad about the death of a friend or family member, my emotions are already on my sleeve, and I remember that sad feeling I had about another friend or a pet or a family member. In fact, right now I'm remembering the many friends and colleagues who have had names read in Memorial Chapel over the years. This compounding grief for each of us adds to the collective grief that David Kessler referred to, and we need an outlet. And that's why I'm so thankful to be part of this community for Memorial Chapel, even if it is virtual, because the two most helpful responses to grief are, one, gathering as a community, and two, the act of remembering. And this is what Memorial Chapel is about. We gather as a community to support each other in the griefs we have felt and the griefs we carry around with us. The Advancement Office heard a wonderful story about one of our alums whose husband died last spring, early on in the pandemic, of natural causes. Someone said to her, "How awful it must have been to lose him at such a difficult time." And her response was refreshing. She said, "No, actually, it was very comforting because we were all grieving during the pandemic. And instead of feeling isolated, I felt the whole world was grieving with me." That sense of being together, of having a community of others feeling with you, is why we're here. In the face of grief, we gather to support each other, to grieve together. And the other thing we do is to remember. I'm wondering if you ever noticed that the word remember is actually two words, or a word and a prefix. The root is member, meaning a particular piece of a complex structure. And the prefix is re, meaning to do again. And when you put those two together, you get remember, to put the pieces back into a whole or co-join or mend. To remember is to re-establish the complex structure that's been broken apart. It's the opposite of dismembering or separating. When someone we love dies, we often feel like our world is shattered or broken apart. And when we remember, we take all of those broken pieces and put them back together, pieces of our loved one and pieces of our own life. The interesting thing is that this same putting back together is how our memory actually works in our brains. Most of us assume that memory is like a camera that records events and sensations that can easily be played back, kind of like a video. But in fact, when we experience something, all the separate bits of information are stored in different places in the brain. The talking we hear, the sound of language, goes to Wernicke's area. What we see goes to our vision center in the occipital lobe. The smells go to our olfactory cortex. The temperature and stress in our body goes to our brainstem. Our feelings go to our limbic system. So when we're experiencing something, our brains dismember that event and store the different parts in different areas. And later, when we want to recall the event, the brain has to remember it, taking all those pieces from all those different places and putting the complex structure back into a whole. That means that when we remember someone, we are literally putting them back together again. Now, remembering someone who has died means putting that person back together, but also in their rightful place, in our hearts and in our communities. We do that so we can move past the grief that feels like fear, so we can cherish those memories and be thankful for their presence and their love. This is what Elie Wiesel, Holocaust survivor and author, meant when he said that the act of remembering is nothing less than a sacred mission. In other words, remembering grounds us in our humanity, while at the same time transcending humanity by putting the world back together around us, linking past, present, and future. And it takes a community to be able to do that. It takes friends, it takes perspective, it takes trust and listening. Sacred remembering is also seen in a wonderful and little-known story that historian Nathaniel Philbrick tells in his book, Mayflower. He tells of Edward Winslow, a pilgrim on the Mayflower who eventually became the governor of Plymouth Colony. And Winslow befriended the native peoples known as the Poconokeets of what we now call Rhode Island. They were the ones who helped the pilgrims of the Mayflower that first Thanksgiving. But Winslow discovered that they had a very special way of remembering. He writes, "When any remarkable act was done, in memory of it, either in the place or at some nearby pathway, they made a hole in the ground about a foot deep. And when others passed by, they would inquire as to the cause and the occasion of the hole, which provided the opportunity to share the memory or the story of what happened. And if the holes should be filled or grown up by any accident, they renew them. And this allows for many things of great importance to be fresh in memory, and also to allow for educational and interesting travel on these paths." Think about that. A memory hole, a physical place to gather, to tell a story, to ask questions, and to remember a person or an event. Today, we post on Snapchat or Instagram, and we take many photographs. But I would suggest that this memorial chapel is a memory hole for us, a place along the path of education, along the path of life, where we stop, gather as a community, inquire about those who have gone before us, and remember, putting them and our community back together again. Further, I would suggest that at this service, we're digging a hole for Rosalind Walter, the original Rosie the Riveter, who was determined to not be defined by gender roles during World War II, but to work on skyscrapers in Manhattan. We're digging a special memory hole for Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who was a champion of women's rights, working tirelessly to make sure our country is a place of justice for all. As we hear their names spoken, as we hear the bells ring for them and for all the alums, friends, and family, then like the Pokanokans, we stop along this path at this memory hole and enter into the sacred act of remembering, putting lives back together along with ours, expanding our hearts, and enlarging this wonderful community.
Hello, everyone. I'm Akira Hippolyte, a member of the Northfield League. I like to share with you The Fall of Our Years by Reverend Mary Bonnie Jackson of the class of 1963. Everything is changed. Life is not the same. It's not just the time of year. That time of life is here. Inside, we feel no different. All around us, there is change. All the colors as they fall are the brightest ones of all, and we know that we can shine and find the light within divine. Autumn's here, there's no denying, no more pretense, no more lying. We do not shed a tear, but joyously surrender at this time of life so dear.
Alumni of the Ethel Walker School. Elizabeth Cowles Armour, class of 1941. Charlotte Perry Behringer, class of 1943. Anne Carpenter Bienstock, class of 1960. Louise French Bludgett, class of 1937. Hannah Griffith Bradley, class of 1945. Elizabeth Leonard Brayman, class of 1946. Lorna Hera Bruin, class of 1941. Virginia L. Burnham, class of 1965. Anne Holton Bushman, class of 1940. Theodosia Smith Casey, class of 1945. Margaret Florence Burden Childs, Class of 1954. Eugenia Hendricks Clark, Class of 1941. Caroline Bush Cole, Class of 1951. Elizabeth Conklin Collins, Class of 1954. Heather Ann Capello, Class of 1980. Nancy Cochran Cudahy, Class of 1942. Elizabeth Stanwood Davis, Class of 1961. Katrina M. Foley, Class of 1957. Cornelia Ahern Fry, Class of 1948. Sandra Barnes Gillespie, Class of 1957. Cheryl Lynn Goldstein, Class of 1992. Catherine Goodhart Graham, Class of 1965. Jane Cole Graves, Class of 1945. Nancy Gerdeau Graves, Class of 1959. Josephine Lynch Harris, Class of 1947. Mariana Cox Hirons, Class of 1944. Joy Wendell Hoffman, Class of 1950. Cornelia Spencer Ives, Class of 1963. Emma Smith Johnston, Class of 1939. Jane DuPont Kidd, Class of 1957. Rosalind Shaw Cornegay, Class of 1945. Virginia McMillan Lambrecht, Class of 1957. Barbara Mayer Marks, Class of 1954. Anne Prescott McKendry, Class of 1948. Maria Josefa Claire Whitman Meyer, Class of 1941. Nancy Miller O'Boyle, Class of 1948. Margaret Hawkins Quaintance, Class of 1957. Mary List Paul Riley, Class of 1952. Caroline Rising Peters Rockwood, Class of 1938. Joan Dickey Shanahan, Class of 1950. Lucy Baker Hufstadter Sharp, Class of 1959. Maria de Almagro Thomas, Class of 1952. Marjorie Holly Uline, Class of 1940. Robin Reeder Valentine, Class of 1960. Rosalind Palmer Walter, Class of 1942. Marie Marseille Wolfe, Class of 1986. Nancy Jones Zachary, Class of 1960. Friends and relatives of the Ethel Walker School community. Frank Alcock. Francis T. Aldrich. Edward O. Alvestad. Audrey Armour Ayers. Barbara Rosenblatt Bash. James Battle Jr. Fred Blocker Sr. Arlene J. Butler. Thomas J. Carter. Anne Cox Chambers. Clarissa Hafner Chandler. Jose B. Coda. Robert Talcott Dupree, Dr. Bruce Derbyshire, Elizabeth Addison Derbyshire, Raymond James Dolphin, Deacon John C. Donaldson, Ruth Vivian Elmore, Christine S. Gates, William Henry Gates II, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Marcia Fennelly Gowan, Dorothy Patricia Hatch, William John Hilton, William Bradford Hubble Jr., Robert McKittrick Jones III, Elizabeth Farron Kelly, Gerald Lauderdale, Gordon Fitzgerald Link, Donald McDonald, Eileen Mahoney, Wilbert D. McDonald, Barrett Froman Merrill, Catherine Babcock Mountcastle, Thomas David Mullen, Mary Reynolds Scowler Nelson, Stephen Ossipuk, Peter Van Ness Phillip, James Marshall Porter, Stephen V.R. Spalding III, Neil William Strohmeyer, Taylor Chase Thomas, Dr. Theodore Van Italy, Samuel Dexter Warner II, Sarah J. Windmill, Sarah Ruth Weinberg.
I am Susanna Potts, a member of the Northfield League. I would like to share with you "This Beginning May Have Always Meant This End" by Camille T. Dungy, who will be our visiting writer later this fall. Coming from a place where we meandered mornings and met quail, scrub jay, mockingbird, I knew coyote like everyone else. I knew cactus, knew tumbleweed, lichen on the rocks and pillbugs beneath, rattlers sometimes, the soft smell of sage and the ferment of cactus pear. Coming from this place, from a place where grass might grow greener on the hillside in winter than in any yard, where the whole rest of the year, everything I loved, chaparral pea, bottlebrush tree, jacaranda, mariposa, pinyon, and desert oak, the kumquat in the back garden, and wisteria vining the porch, the dry grass whispered long after the rains, raccoons in and out of the hills, trash hurled by the hottest wind, the dry grass tall now and golden, lawn chairs, eucalyptus, everything, in a place we knew, everything we knew, little and large and mine and ours, except horror, all of it. Everything could flame up that quickly, could flare and be gone.